The sound of wood creaking against wood echoed through the twilight silence as Tessa Owens sat on her porch, pushing the empty cradle back and forth with one weathered hand while the other clutched a faded blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender and lost dreams. The summer heat of 1878 Arkansas hung heavy in the air, mosquitoes dancing over the nearby creek while cicadas sang their relentless song. But none of it touched the cold emptiness that had taken root in her chest 6 months ago, when fever had stolen her daughter away, and her husband had followed 3 weeks later, unable to bear the grief that matched her own. She did not cry anymore because there were no tears left, only the mechanical motion of rocking that cradle that should have held her 10-month-old Lucy. The motion that kept her hands busy so they would not shake, kept her mind occupied so it would not spiral into that dark place where screaming seemed like the only reasonable response to a world so cruel. The small farm she and Daniel had built together outside Bentonville felt impossibly large now. The chickens she fed each morning indifferent witnesses to her solitude. The cow that needed milking twice daily her only reason for rising from bed at all. She was 24 years old and felt ancient, hollowed out, a shell of the laughing girl who had married her childhood sweetheart at 18 and believed the world was full of nothing but promise. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her trance, and she looked up to see a rider approaching in the fading light, silhouetted against the orange and purple sky like something out of a painting. She did not move from the porch, did not stop the cradle's motion, simply watched as the horse drew closer and she could make out more details. The man sat tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, dust covering his clothes in a way that spoke of long miles traveled. Most riders passed by her property without stopping, heading either into Bentonville proper or continuing south toward Fort Smith. But this one was slowing, turning toward her gate. Tessa felt neither fear nor curiosity, only a dull acknowledgement that someone was approaching. She had her rifle leaning against the doorframe within easy reach, more from habit than any real sense of self-preservation these days. The man dismounted at her gate, not presuming to enter without permission, and even in the gathering darkness she could see he was young, probably close to her own age, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who spent his life working rather than sitting idle. "Evening, madam," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the small yard. "I apologize for the intrusion at this hour. My horse has gone lame about a mile back, and I was hoping I might water him at your creek and perhaps camp nearby for the night. I can pay you for the trouble." She should send him away. A lone woman had no business allowing strange men onto her property, even one who seemed polite enough. But something in his voice, a thread of genuine weariness rather than threat, made her pause. Or perhaps it was simply that she had stopped caring about the rules of propriety that governed other people's lives, the ones whose worlds had not shattered into irreparable pieces. "Creek's beyond the barn," she said, her voice rusty from disuse. She rarely spoke anymore except to herself or the animals. "You can make camp there. No charge." He touched his hat in thanks and led his limping horse through the gate, careful to close it behind him. She watched him pass, noting the way he moved with a cowboy's easy grace despite the obvious exhaustion in his frame, the way his horse trusted him completely despite its injury. Those small observations registered without meaning much, details filed away by a mind that still functioned even though her heart had stopped months ago. The cradle kept rocking. Back and forth, the rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. She did not see when the stranger actually made camp, retreating into her small cabin as full darkness fell, going through the motions of lighting her lamp, preparing a simple supper of cornbread and beans that she ate without tasting, washing her single plate and cup at the basin. The cradle sat in the corner of the main room, and she could not stop herself from going to it, kneeling beside it, running her fingers over the smooth wood Daniel had sanded so carefully before Lucy was born. He had carved tiny flowers into the headboard, clumsy but made with such love that they were beautiful in their imperfection. She did not remember lying down on the floor beside it, but she must have fallen asleep there, because she woke to morning light streaming through the window and her back aching from the hard wooden boards. The sounds of her chickens demanding breakfast filtered through the walls, and she pushed herself up, splashed water on her face from the basin, and went out to handle the morning chores that kept her tethered to this life. The stranger was already up, she saw, had a small fire going by the creek and something cooking in a pan. His horse stood hobbled nearby, grazing peacefully, though it still favored its left foreleg. She went about her routine, scattering feed for the chickens, collecting eggs, moving to the barn to milk Betsy, the Jersey cow who had been Daniel's pride and joy. The cow lowed softly, patient as Tessa washed her udder and began the rhythmic work of milking, her forehead pressed against Betsy's warm flank, the sound of milk hitting the pail oddly soothing. When she emerged from the barn carrying her pail of fresh milk, the stranger was standing a respectful distance away, clearly having approached while she worked but not wanting to startle her. "Morning, madam," he said, repeating his gesture of touching his hat brim. In the full light of day she could see him more clearly. He was indeed young, probably 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that held a particular kind of sadness she recognized, because she saw it in her own mirror each morning. His jaw was strong, shadowed with several days of beard growth, and there was a scar along his left cheekbone that looked old and well-healed. "I wanted to thank you for your hospitality. I checked on my horse this morning, and he needs more than a day's rest before he should be ridden again. There's no infection, just a stone bruise, but I don't want to risk making it worse. I was hoping to work out an arrangement with you, if you're willing. I could do work around your property in exchange for letting him rest here for a few more days. I'm handy with repairs, can mend fences, fix whatever needs fixing." Tessa looked at him for a long moment, weighing the offer. She had fallen behind on maintenance, things Daniel would have handled but that she lacked either the skill or strength to manage alone. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Part of the chicken coop fence needed replacing. The well cover had a crack in it. A dozen small tasks that seemed insurmountable when she could barely summon the energy to feed herself. "I have coffee on if you would like some," he added when she did not immediately answer. "And bacon. I would be pleased to share my breakfast with you as a small thanks for the camping spot at least." Food held little appeal, but coffee was something she had been rationing, using her dwindling supply sparingly. The offer of it, combined with the genuine courtesy in his manner, tipped her decision. "All right," she said. "You can stay until your horse heals. There's work enough if you are truly willing." His smile was small but real, transforming his solemn face into something almost handsome. "I am, thank you, madam. My name is Tucker Preston." "Tessa Owens," she replied, then added after a pause, "I am widowed. My husband passed this spring." She saw understanding flicker in his eyes, perhaps recognition that this explained the state of her property, the sadness that clung to her like morning fog. He did not offer condolences or pry, simply nodded and gestured toward his campfire. "The coffee is hot, and there's plenty." She followed him to the creek, carrying her milk pail, and accepted the tin cup he poured for her. The coffee was strong and good, and she felt it warming her from the inside, waking parts of her that had been dormant. He served her bacon on a clean plate, crispy and perfectly cooked, and she found herself actually tasting it, the salt and smoke pleasant on her tongue. They ate in silence for a while, the morning sounds of birds and insects filling the space between them. Finally, Tucker spoke again, his voice careful. "If you do not mind my asking, what work would you like me to start with first?" she considered. "The barn door. It drags on the ground and I can barely open it anymore." "I can handle that," he said. "Do you have tools?" "If not, I have some basic ones in my saddlebags. There's a toolbox in the barn. My husband was—" She stopped, the words catching. It was the first time she had tried to speak about Daniel to anyone since his death. He was good with his hands. Tucker's expression was gentle, patient. "I will take good care of his tools, madam. You have my word." After breakfast, true to his promise, Tucker retrieved the toolbox from the barn and set to work on the door. Tessa returned to her cabin, intending to churn the butter she had been putting off for days, but found herself standing at the window instead, watching him work. He moved with confidence and skill, examining the hinges, taking measurements, whistling softly under his breath. There was something almost painful about seeing another man using Daniel's tools, working on Daniel's barn, existing in the space her husband should have occupied. But there was also something that eased, ever so slightly, the crushing weight of isolation she had been carrying. She forced herself away from the window and turned to find herself facing the cradle again. It sat where it always sat, in the corner of the main room where the light would have been perfect for watching a baby play. She had moved it there when Lucy was 6 months old, positioning it so she could cook and clean while keeping her daughter in view, singing to her, talking to her, delighting in every coo and giggle. Now it mocked her with its emptiness, but she could not bring herself to put it away, to hide it in the barn or the root cellar where she would not have to see it. That felt like erasing Lucy entirely, like admitting her daughter had never existed at all. Before she realized what she was doing, she was sitting beside it again, one hand on the smooth wooden rail, pushing it gently into motion. The familiar creak was almost comforting, a sound that connected her to those brief, shining months when she had been a mother, when her world had been complete. She did not notice when tears started sliding down her face, did not hear the cabin door open or the footsteps that stopped just inside. "Madam," Tucker's voice was soft, uncertain. "I apologize, I should have knocked. I just needed to check the measurement of—" He trailed off, clearly taking in the scene before him, the cradle, the tears, the utter devastation written across her features. Tessa looked up, not bothering to wipe her face, too tired to feel embarrassed. "My daughter," she said, the words scraped raw from her throat. "Lucy. She died of fever 6 months ago. She was 10 months old. My husband Daniel died 3 weeks after." "His heart gave out," the doctor said, "but I think it was grief. I think he just could not bear to stay in a world without her." Tucker stood very still, his hat in his hands, his face reflecting a pain that seemed personal rather than merely sympathetic. "I am so sorry," he said, and his voice carried a weight that told her he understood loss, real loss, not the polite social sorry that most people offered. "I cannot seem to stop rocking it," Tessa continued, words spilling out now that the dam had broken. "I sit here every evening and rock this empty cradle like she is still here, like if I just keep the motion going she will appear. I know it is foolish. I know she is gone, but my hands do not seem to know what else to do." Tucker crossed the room slowly, knelt down beside her with the kind of careful movement one might use around a frightened animal. "It is not foolish," he said quietly. "Grief is not logical. It does not follow rules. When I lost my family 2 years ago, I could not sleep in a bed for months. I would lie on the floor because the bed felt too empty, too wrong. People thought I had lost my mind, but it was the only thing that made sense to me at the time. Tessa turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw the truth of his words written in the lines around his eyes, the set of his shoulders. "Your family," my wife Marion, she was 22. We had been married for 3 years. She died in childbirth along with our son. He never even took a breath. His voice was steady, but his eyes were distant, looking at something far away. I was supposed to protect them, keep them safe, but I could not do anything except watch them slip away. The silence that fell between them was different now. Not uncomfortable, but rather the quiet of two people who had walked through the same dark valley and recognized each other as fellow travelers. Tessa found her hand had stilled on the cradle, her full attention on Tucker. "How do you bear it?" she asked, the question she had been asking herself every morning when she forced herself out of bed. "Badly at first," he admitted. "I drank too much, picked fights, tried to get myself killed in a dozen different ways without having the courage to actually do it. Then one morning I woke up in a jail cell in Kansas City after a particularly stupid bar fight, and the sheriff told me I could either get on a horse and ride in any direction as long as it was away from his town, or I could rot in his cell for 30 days. I chose to ride. I have been riding ever since, working odd jobs, moving from place to place. It does not make the grief go away, but it makes it bearable. I can wake up in a new place and not be surrounded by constant reminders. I can help people with their problems and feel like maybe I have some use in this world, even if I failed the people who mattered most." Tessa absorbed this, understanding it in a way she might not have 6 months ago. "I have thought about leaving," she confessed. "Selling this place, going somewhere new, but I cannot seem to make myself do it. This farm holds every memory I have of my daughter, of my husband. If I leave, what happens to those memories? Do they just disappear?" "No," Tucker said firmly. "The memories are in you, not the place." "But I also understand not being ready to leave. There is no right way to grieve, Tessa. You do whatever you need to do to survive each day." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about the gentle familiarity of it cracked something in her chest. She let out a sob, then another, and then she was crying in a way she had not allowed herself to since Daniel's funeral, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Tucker did not try to touch her or offer empty platitudes. He simply stayed there beside her, a solid presence, letting her fall apart without judgment. When the storm finally passed, leaving her exhausted and wrung out, she found a clean handkerchief pressed into her hand. She wiped her face, embarrassed now by her outburst. "I apologize. That was..." "Human," Tucker interrupted. "That was human and overdue, I would guess." She managed a weak laugh that was almost a sob. "Yes, overdue." He stood, offering her his hand to help her up. She took it, surprised by the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "I am going to finish that barn door," he said. "And then, if you have bread or anything that needs baking, I noticed your outdoor oven could use some repair. One of the bricks is loose." The shift back to practical matters was exactly what she needed, grounding her back in the present moment. "I have bread dough that needs baking," she said. "I prepared it yesterday but could not bring myself to heat the oven." "Then that will be my next project," he said. "And Tessa, thank you for sharing your story with me. I know it was not easy." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched him return outside. Through the window, she saw him go back to the barn, back to his work, and felt something shift inside her. Not healing, exactly. The wounds were too fresh for that. But perhaps the first tiny acknowledgement that healing might someday be possible. The day passed in a strange new rhythm. Tucker worked steadily, fixing the barn door so it swung smooth and true, then carefully repairing the brick oven and getting a fire going to heat it properly. Tessa shaped her bread dough into loaves, moving through the familiar motions, and when the oven was ready, she baked them, filling the air with the warm yeast smell that reminded her of better times. She made extra, more than she needed, and when the loaves were done, she brought one down to Tucker along with butter and some of the jam she had put up last summer. "You do not have to feed me," he protested, but she could see the hunger in his eyes, the way a home-cooked meal must seem like luxury to a man who had been drifting for 2 years. "You are working," she said simply. "Workers get fed." They ate together by the creek as the afternoon heat began to fade, and this time the conversation came easier. He told her about some of the places he had seen, the jobs he had worked, ranging from cowboy to ranch hand to helping build a church in a small town in Missouri. She found herself telling him about Bentonville, about how she and Daniel had grown up here, how they had saved for 3 years to buy this small plot of land, how building their life together had felt like the greatest adventure. "You loved him very much," Tucker observed, and there was no jealousy in it, just recognition. "I did," Tessa said. "From the time I was 15 years old. He was kind and patient, and he made me laugh. When Lucy was born, I thought I could not possibly be happier. And then I watched them both die and could not do anything to stop it." "The helplessness is the worst part," Tucker agreed. "Watching someone you love suffer and being completely powerless." They sat in companionable silence after that, watching the sun sink lower, painting the Arkansas sky in brilliant shades of gold and rose. Tessa felt something she had not felt in months. Not quite peace, but perhaps the distant cousin of peace, a momentary respite from the constant ache. Over the next 3 days, Tucker worked his way through the list of repairs that had been weighing on Tessa. He fixed the chicken coop fence, patched the leak in the barn roof, mended the well cover, and even managed to get the stubborn plow blade sharpened and ready for when she would need to turn the soil for fall planting. Each evening they shared a meal, sometimes at her table, sometimes by the creek, and each evening they talked a little more, sharing pieces of their stories like 2 people assembling a puzzle together. Tessa learned that Tucker had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, that he had learned to ride before he could walk, that he had met his wife at a church social, and known within 5 minutes of talking to her that he wanted to marry her. She told him about Lucy's first smile, the way she had loved being sung to, how Daniel would spend an hour just making faces at her to hear her giggle. The stories hurt, but they also felt important, like keeping Lucy and Daniel and Marion alive through the telling. On the 4th morning, Tucker examined his horse carefully and pronounced the animal fit to travel. "The stone bruise has healed well," he said, running his hand down the horse's leg. "He is ready to go." Tessa felt her stomach drop, a reaction that surprised her with its intensity. She had grown accustomed to Tucker's presence, to having another person to talk to the sound of someone moving around her property with purpose. The thought of returning to her previous solitude felt suddenly unbearable. "Where will you go?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Tucker was quiet for a long moment, staring out toward the horizon. "I have been thinking about that," he said slowly. "I have been drifting for 2 years now, and it occurs to me that maybe I have been running away from my grief rather than living with it. Being here, talking with you, working on something real and solid rather than just passing through. It has reminded me that there can be purpose even in sorrow." He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. "Tessa, I know this is presumptuous. I know I have only been here a few days. But I would like to stay, if you would have me. Not as a drifter passing through, but as someone who stays. I could work your farm, help you manage the things that are too heavy or complicated for one person alone. I would not expect anything from you except perhaps companionship and honest work to fill my days. I would sleep in the barn, take my meals separately if you prefer, whatever arrangement makes you comfortable. I do not want to go back to drifting, not anymore." Tessa's heart was pounding in her chest, a mix of hope and fear warring inside her. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this lifeline he was offering. But another part, the part that still wore Daniel's ring on her finger, felt like accepting his offer would be a betrayal. "I do not know," she said honestly. "Tucker, I am not ready for. I am not asking for romance," he said quickly. "I am not asking you to forget your husband or to feel anything you do not feel. I am asking if you would let me stay and work, let me have a place to belong. You need help with this farm, and I need a reason to stay in one place. It could be mutually beneficial, nothing more." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe it could be that simple. "People will talk," she said. "A widow and an unmarried man living on the same property." "Let them talk," Tucker said. "Unless their talk bothers you." She considered this. The truth was, she had been so isolated in her grief that she barely saw anyone from town anymore. The church ladies who had brought covered dishes in the weeks after Daniel's death had stopped coming when she made it clear she wanted to be left alone. Her nearest neighbor was nearly 2 miles away. What did she care what people said? "All right," she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "You can stay, but in the barn, as you said, and we work together, nothing more." His smile was bright with relief. "Thank you, Tessa. You will not regret this, I promise." She hoped he was right. Tucker proved to be a man of his word. He made himself a comfortable space in the barn's loft, stringing up a hammock and organizing his few possessions neatly. He rose early each morning and worked until the evening light failed, tackling not just repairs but actual farm work, helping Tessa with the heavy labor that had been beyond her capabilities alone. Together they harvested the kitchen garden vegetables, preserved them for winter, repaired the fence line around the property, and began preparing for the fall planting. Working alongside him, Tessa found herself returning slowly to life. She started cooking proper meals again, instead of nibbling at whatever required the least effort. She began to take care of her appearance, pinning her blonde hair up neatly instead of leaving it in a tangled braid, washing her dresses regularly, even humming occasionally as she worked. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but it had shifted somehow, become something she could carry rather than something that buried her. Tucker never pushed for more than she offered, maintaining a respectful distance while still being present. But there were moments, small ones, when she would catch him watching her with an expression that suggested his feelings were developing beyond simple friendship. The way his hand would linger when passing her a tool, the way his eyes softened when she laughed at something he said, the way he went out of his way to do things that would make her smile, like picking wildflowers and leaving them on her porch, or carving a new perch for her chickens, because he noticed one of them was having trouble roosting. She tried not to notice. Tried to tell herself that any feelings growing between them were wrong, too soon, a betrayal of Daniel's memory. But late at night, lying alone in the bed she had shared with her husband, she found herself thinking about Tucker in the barn loft, wondering if he ever lay awake thinking about her too. Summer faded into autumn, the Arkansas heat giving way to cooler mornings and earlier sunsets. The leaves on the oak trees surrounding her property turned gold and red, and Tucker helped her prepare the cabin for winter, checking the chimney, stacking firewood, making sure all the windows were properly sealed. They worked together with an easy rhythm now, anticipating each other's movements, communicating as much through gesture as through words. It was late September when everything changed. Tessa had gone into Bentonville to trade eggs and butter for supplies, leaving Tucker to work on reinforcing the barn's foundation. She returned to find him kneeling beside the cradle in her cabin, his face stricken with guilt. "I am so sorry," he said immediately. "I came in to measure the window for those shutters you wanted, and I bumped the cradle. One of the rockers cracked. I will fix it, I swear. I will make it better than it was." But Tessa was not listening to his apologies. She was staring at the damaged cradle, and instead of the grief and rage she expected to feel, there was something else, something almost like relief. The cradle, that symbol of her loss that she had been unable to stop rocking, unable to put away, was broken now. The decision had been taken out of her hands. "It is all right," she heard herself say. "It is just a cradle." Tucker looked up at her, confusion and concern warring on his face. "But it was your daughter's." "It was," Tessa agreed. She crossed the room and knelt beside him, running her hand over the damaged wood. "And I have been holding on to it like if I just rocked it enough she would come back. But she is not coming back, Tucker. Neither is Daniel, and I think maybe it is time I accepted that." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were different from the hopeless, drowning tears she had shed before. These felt cleaner somehow, like rain washing away dust. "I loved them. I will always love them, but they are gone and I am still here. And maybe that means I am supposed to keep living, not just existing." Tucker reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he took her hand in his. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met," he said quietly. "The way you have survived this, the way you get up every morning and keep going even when everything in you must want to give up. It is remarkable." "I did not feel strong," Tessa said. "I felt like I was drowning, but then you came and you threw me a rope. You showed me that someone else could understand, that I was not alone in this impossible grief." "Tessa," Tucker said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I need to tell you something, and you can tell me to leave if you want, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore. These past months working beside you, talking with you, watching you fight your way back to life, I have fallen in love with you, not because I am trying to replace what you lost, and not because I have forgotten Marion, but because you are extraordinary and being near you makes me want to be the man I was before grief tried to destroy me." Tessa's breath caught. She should tell him no, should explain that it was too soon, that her heart was still too broken, that she could not possibly love anyone again. But the words that came out were different. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to love you because everyone I love dies. Lucy died. Daniel died. Marion died. What if loving you means losing you too?" "Life does not come with guarantees," Tucker said. "I could die tomorrow, you could. The sun could fail to rise. But we are both here right now, both alive, both carrying grief that will never fully heal, but maybe together does not have to be quite so heavy. Is that not worth the risk?" She looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had wandered onto her property with a lame horse and somehow helped her find her way back to herself. His gray eyes were steady, patient, waiting for her answer without pressure. She thought about Daniel, about the love they had shared, and knew with absolute certainty that he would not want her to spend the rest of her life alone, rocking an empty cradle. He had loved her too much for that. "Yes," she said. "Yes, it is worth the risk." Tucker's expression transformed, joy breaking across his face like sunrise. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her heart ache in an entirely different way. "May I court you properly?" he asked. "I know it has been unconventional so far, but I want to do right by you." Tessa laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine warmth. "I think we have moved past conventional already, but yes, Tucker Preston, you may court me." He kissed her then, soft and careful. a question more than a demand. She kissed him back, tasting salt from tears she had not realized were falling, and felt something inside her chest that had been frozen for months begin to thaw. It was not the same as what she had felt with Daniel. Could never be the same because they were different people, shaped by different joys and sorrows. But it was real, and it was good, and it was a kind of hope she had thought lost to her forever. They pulled apart slowly, and Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I will fix the cradle," he said. "We can store it safely, keep it for when you are ready." "For when we are ready," Tessa corrected softly. "Someday, maybe, if we are blessed, but not yet. Right now, I just want to learn how to be happy again. With you." "That," Tucker said, smiling, "I can help with." The town of Bentonville did indeed talk, as Tessa had predicted. The widow Owens and that drifter she had taken in, living out there alone, unseemly no matter how you looked at it. But Tucker handled it with grace, and Tessa with surprising indifference. Let them gossip. She had survived the unsurvivable. What were wagging tongues compared to that? Tucker began coming to church with her on Sundays, sitting beside her in the pew she had shared with Daniel, and if that caused more whispers, neither of them cared. Reverend Matthews, a kind man in his 60s who had presided over both Lucy's and Daniel's funerals, took Tessa aside one Sunday in October. "I have heard the gossip," he said gently, "and I wanted you to know that I am pleased to see you returning to life. Your husband was a good man, and I believe he would be happy to know you have found someone to walk beside you again." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you know. Mr. Preston seems like a fine young man," the Reverend continued. "Hard-working, respectful. But I would suggest, for both your sakes and for the sake of stopping the more vicious talk, that you consider making your arrangement official sooner rather than later." It was a delicate way of saying they should marry, and Tessa knew he was right. But the thought of marriage, of replacing Daniel in that way, still felt overwhelming. Tucker, when she mentioned the conversation to him that evening, was understanding. "There is no rush," he assured her. "I am content with however you want to proceed. I meant what I said about courting you properly. We can take all the time you need." But as autumn deepened and the nights grew colder, Tessa found herself thinking more and more about the future. Tucker still slept in the barn, though the temperatures were dropping enough that she worried about him being comfortable. They spent their evenings together now, sitting by her fireplace, talking or reading or simply being in each other's presence. He would leave reluctantly when the fire burned low, bundling up against the cold for the walk to the barn. And every night, Tessa would watch him go and feel the wrongness of it, the way her cabin felt too empty without him. It was a particularly bitter night in early November when she made her decision. Sleet was rattling against the windows, and she knew the barn, for all Tucker had done to weatherproof it, would be freezing. She put on her heaviest shawl and carried a lantern out through the icy rain, her boots slipping on the already forming ice. Tucker met her at the barn door, alarmed. "Tessa, what are you doing out here? You will catch your death." "Marry me," she said, the words tumbling out. "Not because the town says we should or because it is practical, though it is both those things. Marry me because I love you, because I am tired of saying good night and watching you walk away. Because I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep in your arms and build a life together that honors the ones we lost while still being ours. Marry me, Tucker Preston." He stared at her for a long moment, ice crystals forming in his dark hair, his breath coming out in white clouds. Then he whooped, picked her up, and spun her around despite the treacherous footing. "Yes," he shouted into the storm. "Yes, Tessa Owens, I will marry you." They were both laughing as he set her down, both soaked through and freezing, and they stumbled together back to the cabin. shedding wet clothes by the fire, warming each other with kisses and whispered promises. That night, Tucker did not return to the barn, and if it was scandalous, Tessa found she could not bring herself to care. They had both been through too much, lost too much, to waste time on false propriety now. Reverend Matthews married them 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church, with only a handful of witnesses present. Tessa wore a simple blue dress rather than white, feeling it more appropriate for a second marriage. Tucker had gotten his hair cut and wore his one good suit, and the way he looked at her when she walked down the aisle made her feel beautiful despite everything she had been through. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves, promises that acknowledged their past griefs while committing to their shared future. When Tucker placed the ring on her finger, joining the one she still wore from Daniel, Tessa felt no conflict, no sense of betrayal. Instead, she felt Daniel's blessing, a sense that he would be happy she had found love again, that she was choosing life over endless mourning. The winter that followed was the happiest Tessa had known since before Lucy's birth. She and Tucker settled into married life with an ease that came from already knowing each other, already having worked side by side through hard times. He was patient with her moments of grief, holding her when she cried on what would have been Lucy's second birthday. She was patient with his nightmares, the ones where he relived Marion's death, waking him gently and reminding him he was safe, he was home. They did not try for a baby right away, both agreeing they needed time to simply be together, to strengthen their bond before adding the complexity and fear that pregnancy would bring. But in the spring, as the Arkansas landscape burst into bloom and the farm work intensified, Tessa found herself thinking more and more about the possibility. She was 25 now. Tucker was 28. They had time, but she also knew too well how fragile life was, how quickly time could run out. It was a warm May evening when she brought up the subject. They were sitting on the porch together, watching the sun set, and Tucker had his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat steady and strong and felt anchored by it. "Tucker," she said quietly, "I want to talk about having children." She felt him tense slightly, then force himself to relax. "All right," he said carefully. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that I am terrified," she admitted. "Terrified of being pregnant, of giving birth, of having a child to love who could be taken from me again. But I am also thinking that fear is not a reason to deny ourselves the chance at that joy. We both know too well that life is short and unpredictable. If we wait until we are not afraid, we will wait forever." Tucker was quiet for a long moment, his hand absently stroking her hair. "I am terrified too," he confessed. "I lost Marion and my son in childbirth. The thought of going through that again, of potentially losing you the same way, it haunts me. But I also see how you light up when you hold the neighbor's baby at church. I see how you pause sometimes when we pass the cradle in the barn, the one I fixed. And I want to give you that if we can have it. I want us to have a family, even though the risk scares me senseless." "Then we agree," Tessa said, turning to look up at him. "We are both terrified, but we are going to do it anyway." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "We will face it together," he promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." 3 months later, in August, Tessa realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, not wanting to raise Tucker's hopes prematurely, but when the second week passed with no change, she knew. On a Sunday morning before church, she told him, watching his face cycle through shock, fear, and finally pure joy. "A baby," he breathed, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Tessa asked, needing to hear it. "I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Tucker said honestly. "But yes, Tessa, I am happy." The pregnancy was not easy. Tessa suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester, and the memories of carrying Lucy, of how that pregnancy had been easy and joyful, haunted her. Every small pain sent her into panic, convinced she was losing the baby. Tucker was endlessly patient, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her back when it ached, talking her down from her fears. He was also terrified, though he tried to hide it. Tessa would catch him sometimes staring at her with an expression of such naked fear that it broke her heart. She knew he was reliving Marion's death, imagining worst-case scenarios. They clung to each other through the long months, hoping and praying and trying to trust that this time would be different. When Tessa was 6 months along, Tucker made a decision. "I want to take you to Fort Smith," he said. "There is a doctor there, a real doctor, not just the town physician. I want him to examine you, make sure everything is progressing as it should." It was a 3-day journey by wagon, and Tessa's first instinct was to refuse, not wanting to risk the rough roads. But she saw the desperation in Tucker's eyes and understood this was something he needed to do, some way he could feel like he was protecting her. So she agreed. The doctor in Fort Smith, a serious man named Dr. Harrison who had trained in Boston, gave Tessa a thorough examination. When he was done, he smiled at the anxious couple before him. "Mrs. Preston, your baby is healthy and strong. I can hear a good heartbeat. You are carrying well, and I see no signs of complications. I understand you lost a child previously, but there is nothing to suggest this pregnancy will follow that pattern." Tessa burst into tears of relief, and Tucker had to sit down, his face pale. Dr. Harrison, clearly experienced with frightened parents, prescribed rest when possible, good nutrition, and told them to send for him if she went into labor and they could manage the journey. Otherwise, he recommended having the local midwife present and gave them detailed instructions on what to watch for, what was normal and what would require immediate help. The journey back to Bentonville felt lighter somehow, the fear not gone but reduced to manageable levels. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about how they would tell their child about Lucy, and about Marion and the baby Tucker had lost, making sure those lost loved ones remained part of their family story. Winter arrived again, and Tessa grew large with the baby. Tucker had converted the small storage room off their bedroom into a nursery, painting it cheerful yellow and bringing down the repaired cradle from the barn loft. Tessa had made new bedding for it, soft flannel blankets and tiny gowns, letting herself hope in a way she had been afraid to with Lucy. The baby came on a cold February night, exactly 2 weeks before her due date. Tessa's labor started in the early evening, and Tucker immediately sent for the midwife, Mrs. Thompson, an experienced woman in her 50s who had delivered half the babies in Bentonville. Then he settled in to wait with Tessa, holding her hand through the contractions, wiping her face with cool cloths, never leaving her side despite his obvious terror. Mrs. Thompson arrived within an hour, examined Tessa, and pronounced everything progressing normally. "First babies can take a while," she warned. "Even second babies for a woman who has already borne a child. Get comfortable, Mr. Preston. It might be a long night." It was. Tessa labored through the night and into the next morning, and there were moments when the pain was so intense she wanted to give up, wanted to beg them to make it stop. But Tucker was there, steady and sure, telling her she could do this. She was strong enough. Their baby was almost here. And finally, as dawn broke over the Arkansas landscape, she felt the overwhelming urge to push. "That's it," Mrs. Thompson coached. "Good, Mrs. Preston, I can see the head. One more big push." Tessa bore down with everything she had, and suddenly there was relief and pressure, and then the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby crying, lusty and strong. "It is a boy," Mrs. Thompson announced, quickly wiping him clean and checking him over before placing him on Tessa's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Tessa looked down at her son, this tiny, perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair and searching eyes, and felt her heart expand in a way she had forgotten was possible. He was beautiful. He was alive. He was theirs. Tucker was crying openly, his hand on the baby's tiny back, his expression one of wonder and overwhelming relief. "We did it," he whispered. "Tessa, we did it. He is here and you are here and he is perfect." "Do you have a name chosen, Mrs. Thompson?" asked as she went about the business of delivering the afterbirth and making sure Tessa was all right. Tessa and Tucker looked at each other, having discussed this at length. "Daniel Thomas Preston," Tessa said softly, honoring both her first husband and Tucker's middle name. "We will call him Danny." Mrs. Thompson smiled. "It is a fine name for a fine boy." The hours after Danny's birth passed in a blur of exhausted joy. Mrs. Thompson stayed to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, showed Tessa how to help Danny latch for nursing, then finally left with instructions to rest as much as possible and promises to check in the next day. Tucker, despite his own exhaustion, could not stop staring at his son, holding him with a tenderness that made Tessa fall even more in love with her husband. "I was so afraid," Tucker admitted as they lay in bed together, Danny sleeping in the cradle beside them. "So afraid I would lose you the way I lost Marion. I do not think I breathed properly for 9 months." "I know," Tessa said, reaching for his hand. "I was afraid too, but we made it. All 3 of us made it." They were both silent for a moment, and Tessa knew they were both thinking of the children who had not made it, of Lucy and the unnamed son Tucker had never gotten to hold. The grief was still there and always would be. But it existed now alongside this new joy, proof that life continued, that love persisted, that hope was not foolish but necessary. The first months of Danny's life were both exhausting and exhilarating. He was a good baby, healthy and growing well, but he still needed constant care. Tessa and Tucker worked together, Tucker taking on even more of the farm work so Tessa could rest and feed Danny, while also being fully involved in his son's care in a way many fathers were not. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Danny when he was fussy, sang to him the cowboy songs he remembered from his own childhood. Spring came again, bringing with it new life on the farm. The chickens hatched chicks, Betsy the cow had a calf, and the fields needed planting. Tucker hired a young man from town to help with the heaviest work, recognizing that he could not do everything himself now that they had a family to care for. Tessa, with Danny strapped to her in a sling, managed the garden and the household, slowly regaining her strength. On a warm May afternoon, when Danny was 3 months old, Tessa found Tucker in the barn, repairing a harness. She had Danny in her arms and the baby was awake and alert, taking in the world with curious eyes. "I have been thinking," she said, and Tucker looked up with an expression of amused wariness that suggested he knew those words often preceded interesting conversations. "About what?" he asked, setting aside his work and giving her his full attention. "About how much I love our life," Tessa said. "About how grateful I am that you rode up that evening with a lame horse, about how you helped me find my way back from grief to living, and about how I would like to have more children if we are blessed with them. Not right away," she added quickly. "Danny is still so little, but someday. I want our home to be full of life and love and the chaos of children." Tucker crossed the barn to her, pulling both her and Danny into a gentle embrace. "I want that too," he said. "I never thought I would have even one child after losing Marion and our son." The fact that I have Danny, that I have you and this life we are building together. It feels like more than I deserve, but I will gladly take every blessing we are given." True to her hopes, they were blessed. 18 months after Danny was born, Tessa gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Elizabeth, after both their mothers. 2 years after Rose came another boy, Samuel, called Sam. The house that had once echoed with emptiness and grief was now constantly filled with the sounds of children laughing, crying, playing, growing. Tucker proved to be an exceptional father, patient and loving, teaching his children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, reading to them every evening, involving them in age-appropriate farm work so they understood the value of labor and responsibility. Tessa watched him with their children and felt her heart swell, knowing he was giving them the childhood he had treasured, making sure they knew they were loved and valued. The farm prospered under their joint stewardship. They expanded the chicken coop, added another cow, planted an orchard that would take years to mature but would provide fruit for their children and hopefully grandchildren. Tucker had stopped drifting and planted roots deep, and Tessa had transformed from a woman drowning in sorrow to one who embraced life with open arms. They never forgot their lost ones. Lucy's birthday was always marked with quiet remembrance, and as the children grew old enough to understand, Tessa told them about the sister they had never met, making sure Lucy remained part of their family story. Tucker spoke of Marion too, especially to Danny, wanting his son to know about the woman who had made Tucker a father, even though that fatherhood had been tragically brief. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Tucker surprised Tessa with a gift. It was a painting, commissioned from an artist passing through Bentonville. It showed their family, Tucker and Tessa standing together with Danny, now 4 years old, Rose, almost 3, and baby Sam in Tessa's arms. But in the background, rendered in softer, almost ethereal tones, were 3 more figures: a young woman holding a baby and a toddler girl holding a small bouquet of flowers, Marion and her son. Lucy. Tessa touched the painting with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her face. "Tucker," she whispered. "They are part of us," he said quietly. "They always will be. I wanted our children to see that, to understand that love does not end, it just transforms. We carry them with us even as we move forward." It was perfect, and they hung it in a place of honor in their home, a reminder of where they had been and how far they had come. Years passed in the way they do when life is full and good. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Danny proved to be a natural horseman like his father, already talking about becoming a cowboy for one of the big ranches when he got older. Rose was gentle and nurturing, always caring for injured animals or helping Tessa with the younger children. Sam was the wild one, fearless and constantly getting into mischief. When Tessa was 32, she gave birth to their 4th child, another daughter they named Grace. Tucker was 40 by then, silver threading through his dark hair, lines deepening around his eyes, but he was still strong and vital, still the man who had ridden up to her farm so many years ago and offered to fill both her cradle and her heart. One evening, when Grace was about 6 months old, Tessa stood on the porch watching the sunset while Tucker corralled the older children for bed. The sound of their protests and laughter drifted through the open windows, and she smiled at the familiar chaos. Her hand absently went to the porch post where she used to sit and rock Lucy's empty cradle, lost in grief so profound she had not known if she would survive it. Tucker emerged from the house, leaving the children in Rose's surprisingly capable care for a moment, and came to stand beside her. He knew what she was thinking, 12 years of marriage had made them experts at reading each other's thoughts. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Letting a drifter stay?" Tessa turned to him, this man who had saved her life simply by being present for it, by understanding her grief and helping her carry it until she could walk again on her own. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me back my life, Tucker. You gave me a family and a future. You filled my heart." "We filled each other's hearts," he corrected, pulling her close. "We both came to this place broken, and we somehow managed to heal each other. That is not something I could have done alone, Tessa. You saved me as much as I saved you." They stood together as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The Arkansas landscape spread out before them, the farm they had built together thriving, their children safe and warm inside. Behind them, in the room that had once held only an empty cradle and crushing sorrow, 4 children slept in beds Tucker had built with his own hands, surrounded by love and security. It had not been an easy path. They had both walked through valleys so dark they thought they might never find light again. But they had found each other in that darkness, had reached out hands and pulled each other toward hope. And in doing so, they had created something beautiful. A family built not just on romantic love but on understanding, on shared grief transformed into shared joy, on the fundamental truth that life, for all its pain, was worth living. The cradle, carefully preserved and stored in the attic now that their youngest had outgrown it, would someday rock grandchildren. The farm would pass to their children and their children's children. The love story that had begun with a lonely woman rocking an empty cradle and a lonely cowboy offering to fill it would become family legend, told and retold, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could find a way. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Tucker and Tessa went back inside together, back to their children, back to their life. The past would always be with them, woven into the fabric of who they were, but it no longer defined them. They had taken their grief and transformed it into something meaningful, something lasting, something that honored those they had lost while celebrating those they had found. In the end, that was the greatest gift they had given each other. Not just love, though there was plenty of that, but the permission and courage to keep living, to keep hoping, to keep their hearts open to joy even after experiencing profound loss. They had filled each other's empty spaces not by forgetting what came before, but by making room for what could come after. And so they lived, raising their children on the Arkansas farm, building a legacy of resilience and love that would echo through generations. The lonely widow and the drifting cowboy had found each other at precisely the moment they both needed saving. And in saving each other, they had created something far greater than either could have imagined on that dusty summer evening so many years ago when Tucker Preston had ridden up to Tessa Owens's gate and asked to water his horse. Years continued to unfold in gentle rhythms. The children grew tall and strong, Danny eventually taking over much of the farm work alongside his father, his shoulders broadening as he entered his teenage years. Rose developed a talent for healing, helping birth calves and foals with such natural skill that people started calling her when their animals were in distress. Sam's wildness mellowed into adventurous spirit, and he talked constantly of seeing the wider world beyond Arkansas. Grace, the youngest, was the family peacemaker, somehow knowing exactly what to say when tensions ran high, possessing wisdom beyond her years. Tucker and Tessa watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of time's passage. They no longer took any moment for granted, having learned too well how fragile life could be. They celebrated every birthday, every small achievement, every ordinary day as the gift it was. When Danny turned 16, He asked his father to teach him everything he knew about horses and cattle, declaring his intention to work for one of the big ranches for a few years to gain experience before eventually returning to take over the family farm. Tucker taught him with patience and thoroughness, passing on not just practical skills but the values that had guided his own life. Honesty, hard work, respect for the land and animals, and the understanding that true strength lay in gentleness rather than force. Rose, at 14, had become Tessa's right hand in managing the household and garden. They worked side by side, and Tessa found herself confiding in her daughter in ways she never had before, telling her stories about Lucy, about Daniel, about the grief that had nearly consumed her and the cowboy who had helped her find her way back. Rose listened with the same deep empathy that characterized everything she did, and Tessa saw so much of her own younger self in her daughter that it sometimes took her breath away. On Tessa's 35th birthday, the children conspired with Tucker to throw her a surprise party, inviting neighbors from miles around. The farm was filled with people and laughter, tables groaning under the weight of food everyone had brought. Tessa stood in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by friends and family, and felt almost dizzy with gratitude. This life, these people, this abundance of love and connection was so far removed from that dark place she had inhabited after losing Lucy and Daniel that it seemed impossible it belonged to the same person. But she was the same person, just transformed by time and healing and Tucker's steady presence. The scars were still there, would always be there, but they no longer defined her. She had learned to carry her losses without being crushed by them, to honor her grief without being imprisoned by it. That night, after the guests had left and the children were finally asleep, Tucker found Tessa sitting on the porch in the same spot where he had first seen her all those years ago. There was no cradle now, just a woman content in her own skin, at peace with her past and hopeful for her future. "What are you thinking about?" Tucker asked, settling beside her and pulling her against his side. "About everything," Tessa said. "About Lucy and how she would have been 13 years old now, probably driving me crazy with teenage dramatics. About Daniel and how he would have loved these children. About Marion and your son and how I wish I could have known them. About how you rode up that evening and changed everything without even knowing it." "I knew," Tucker said quietly. "Maybe not consciously, but some part of me recognized you that first evening. Recognized another soul that had been shattered and was struggling to put itself back together. I think that is why I asked to stay, not just for me, but because I could see you needed someone as much as I did." "We were both so broken," Tessa mused. "How did we manage to build something so beautiful out of all those broken pieces?" "Because broken does not mean worthless," Tucker said. "And because we were willing to be patient with each other, to let healing happen at its own pace. We did not try to fix each other or rush past the grief. We just sat with it together until it became bearable." Tessa turned to kiss him, slow and sweet, pouring 12 years of love and gratitude into that simple gesture. When they pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder and watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "I want to do something," she said after a long silence. "I want to plant a memorial garden, something beautiful to honor the ones we lost. Not a cemetery or anything morbid, but a place of life and growth. We could plant Lucy's favorite flowers, the ones I used to pick for her when she was sick. And Marion loved roses, did she not?" "She did," Tucker confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "White roses especially." "Then we will plant white roses," Tessa said. "And a tree for your son, something strong and enduring. We will make it a place of peace and remembrance, but also hope. Somewhere our children and grandchildren can go to feel connected to the family members they never got to meet." Tucker held her tighter. "That is a beautiful idea. We can start on it this spring." And they did. When the ground thawed and planting season arrived, the whole family worked together to create a memorial garden in a sunny corner of the property. They planted white roses that would bloom fragrant and full each summer. They planted forget-me-nots, Lucy's favorite, creating a carpet of blue that would return year after year. They planted an oak tree for Tucker's unnamed son, digging the hole deep and surrounding the sapling with care. And at the center, they placed a simple stone marker with names and dates, a permanent acknowledgement of the love that persisted beyond death. The children took ownership of the garden, making sure it was always maintained, adding their own touches over the years. It became a sacred space for the family, a place to go when grief felt heavy or when they simply wanted to feel connected to their history. Tessa often found Tucker there early in the mornings, talking quietly to Marion, updating her on their life, thanking her for making him a father even though that gift had been so painfully brief. She never interrupted these moments, understanding his need to maintain that connection. Similarly, Tucker would find Tessa there on Lucy's birthday or on difficult days, sitting beside the forget-me-nots, sometimes crying, sometimes simply being still. He would sit beside her without speaking, offering silent companionship until she was ready to return to the world of the living. Time continued its relentless march. Danny left for his ranch work at 17, breaking Tessa's heart even as she understood his need to spread his wings. He wrote letters regularly, describing his adventures, the things he was learning, the hard work that was shaping him into a man. He came home for holidays and important occasions, and each time Tessa was struck by how much more mature he seemed, how much he resembled Tucker in his bearing and quiet confidence. Rose, at 16, attracted the attention of a young man from town, the son of the blacksmith, a respectful boy named James who treated her with the kind of careful reverence that made Tucker approve, despite his natural inclination to distrust any boy interested in his daughter. Tessa watched the courtship with mixed emotions, remembering her own young love with Daniel, hoping Rose would be spared the heartbreak she had endured. Sam, true to his adventurous spirit, talked increasingly about heading west when he came of age, maybe to California or the territories, wanting to see mountains and oceans and everything the vast country had to offer. Grace, still young at 8, was already showing signs of being the one who would stay close to home, who would be there to care for her parents as they aged, who would carry on the family stories. Tucker turned 45, and while he remained strong and capable, both he and Tessa were aware of their mortality in a way they had not been as younger people. They talked seriously about the future, about what would happen to the farm, about ensuring all their children were provided for. Tucker drew up a will with the help of a lawyer in Fort Smith, making sure everything was documented properly. "I do not plan on going anywhere for a long time," he assured Tessa when she became emotional during these conversations. "But we both know life is unpredictable. I want to make sure you and the children are protected, no matter what happens." It was this practicality, this willingness to face difficult realities head-on, that had always characterized their relationship. They did not shy away from hard truths, having learned through painful experience that denial served no one. Instead, they met challenges directly, supporting each other through whatever came. When Rose announced at 17 that James had proposed and she had accepted, both Tucker and Tessa felt the bittersweet pang of watching their first daughter prepare to leave home. The wedding was set for the following spring, and the farm became a hive of activity as preparations began. Tessa sewed Rose's wedding dress, putting every ounce of love into each stitch, While Tucker and James built furniture for the small house the young couple would occupy on James's father's property. The wedding day dawned bright and beautiful, perfect spring weather that seemed like a blessing. The ceremony took place at the church in Bentonville, and when Tucker walked Rose down the aisle, Tessa saw tears streaming down his face. Her own vision was too blurred with tears to see much of anything, but she heard Rose's voice, steady and sure, as she pledged herself to James, and felt her heart both break and soar. At the reception afterward, held on their farm with tables set up under the oak trees, Danny gave a toast to his sister that had everyone laughing and crying. Sam managed to mostly behave himself, despite his tendency toward mischief. Grace clung to Rose's skirts, not quite understanding why her sister was leaving, and Tucker and Tessa danced together as the sun set, holding each other close, marveling at the passage of time and the family they had built. "We did something right," Tucker murmured into Tessa's hair. "Look at her. Look at how happy she is, how confident. We raised her well." "We did," Tessa agreed, watching Rose and James dance, their faces glowing with love and hope. "All of them. They are all turning out so well." Life settled into a new rhythm with Rose married and maintaining her own household. She and James visited often, and it soon became apparent that they would be making Tucker and Tessa grandparents. When Rose announced she was pregnant, Tessa felt a complicated rush of emotions: joy for her daughter, fear remembering her own losses, hope that Rose would be spared such pain. Tucker seemed to understand her internal turmoil without her speaking it aloud. "Rose is strong," he said that night as they lay in bed. "She comes from a long line of strong women, and she has James and us and the best midwife in the county. She will be fine." Tessa wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the universe would not be so cruel as to visit tragedy on another generation. But she had learned too well that the universe operated on its own logic, indifferent to human wants and needs. All she could do was pray and be there for her daughter. Rose's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in late winter, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl she named Sarah. Holding her first grandchild, Tessa was transported back to holding Lucy, feeling the same overwhelming rush of love tempered now by the hard-won knowledge that such love came with no guarantees. She kissed Sarah's tiny forehead and silently promised to treasure every moment with this new life, to never take her for granted. Tucker, meeting his granddaughter for the first time, was uncharacteristically emotional, holding Sarah with such careful tenderness that James joked he would wear grooves in the floor from all his gentle swaying. But Tessa understood. This was the grandchild he had not been sure he would live to see, the continuation of a family line he had thought ended with Marion's death. Sarah represented hope and future, and the triumph of life over loss. As Sarah grew from infant to toddler, Danny returned home for good, ready to take his place running the family farm alongside his father. At 21, he was every inch the cowboy Tucker had been at that age, skilled and hardworking and blessed with his father's patient way with animals. He courted and married a girl from a neighboring farm, a practical woman named Martha, who proved to be an excellent match for Danny's steady temperament. Sam, true to his word, headed west when he turned 18, breaking Tessa's heart all over again but earning her respect for following his dreams. His letters came sporadically, filled with tales of his adventures, the incredible landscapes he was seeing, the diverse people he was meeting. Tucker read each letter aloud to the family, and they would gather around imagining Sam's adventures, proud of his courage even as they missed his presence. Grace grew into a thoughtful young woman, interested in teaching, spending her free time helping the younger children in town learn their letters and numbers. She showed no inclination to marry young, content to live at home and pursue her studies and teaching work. Tucker and Tessa were secretly pleased to have one child who seemed in no hurry to leave the nest. The years accumulated like pearls on a string, each one precious, each one adding to the richness of their shared life. Tucker's hair went fully gray, then white, but his eyes remained sharp and his hands steady. Tessa developed lines around her eyes and mouth, marks of a life filled with both laughter and tears, and wore them proudly. They were growing old together, a privilege they had both watched denied to others they loved, and they did not take it lightly. When Tessa turned 45 and Tucker 53, they decided to take a trip, just the two of them, back to Fort Smith where Dr. Harrison had examined Tessa during her first pregnancy with Danny. The doctor had long since retired, but they wanted to see the city again, to mark how far they had come. They left the farm in Danny and Martha's capable hands and set out on an adventure that felt both nostalgic and liberating. Staying in a hotel, eating in restaurants, walking through busy streets reminded them of their younger selves. The people they had been before grief had reshaped them. They talked about everything and nothing, made love like newlyweds despite their aging bodies, laughed at private jokes accumulated over nearly 20 years of marriage. It was a renewal, a recommitment, a celebration of having not just survived but thrived. On their last evening in Fort Smith, Tucker took Tessa's hand across the restaurant table. "I have something I want to say," he began, and his suddenly serious tone made Tessa's heart skip. "You are not dying, are you?" she asked, only half joking. "No," he assured her with a smile. "At least, not that I know of. But I am getting older, we both are, and I realized I have never properly thanked you for saving my life." "Tucker, you saved mine." "Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "You did save me, Tessa. When I rode up to your farm that evening, I was a broken man who had been running from his grief for 2 years. I was alone and angry and so lost I did not even know which direction I was heading. And you, in the depths of your own devastating grief, still found room to show me kindness. You let me stay. You listened to my story. You gave me purpose and work and eventually love. You gave me a family again when I thought that door was closed forever. You made me want to stop running and start living. So thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to let a stranger into your life and heart. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for every day of the past 20 years. Tessa was crying openly, not bothering to hide her tears or care what the other restaurant patrons thought. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding my grief instead of trying to rush me past it. Thank you for being patient while I learned how to live again. Thank you for every sunrise we have watched together and every sunset and every ordinary moment in between. Thank you for filling my empty cradle and my empty heart and my empty life with so much love. I sometimes cannot believe it is all real." They left the restaurant hand in hand, walking through the lamplit streets of Fort Smith. Two people who had found each other in darkness and built a lighthouse together, guiding each other home. The journey back to Bentonville felt like returning to exactly where they were meant to be. The farm welcomed them back with familiar sights and sounds and smells. Danny and Martha had maintained everything perfectly in their absence, and Grace had made a special supper to celebrate their return. That night, surrounded by family in the home they had built together, Tucker and Tessa exchanged a glance that communicated everything words could not. More grandchildren arrived over the years. Danny and Martha had 3 children in relatively quick succession, 2 boys and a girl who kept the household lively. Rose and James added 2 more daughters to their family, giving Sarah sisters to grow up with. Even Sam, writing from California, mentioned he was courting someone, a fellow adventurer who shared his love of exploration. Tucker and Tessa embraced their roles as grandparents with enthusiasm, delighting in the children while also appreciating that they could hand them back to their parents when the exhaustion became too much. They told stories to their grandchildren, teaching them about the family history, making sure Lucy and Marion and Tucker's lost son remained part of the family narrative. The memorial garden became a place where multiple generations gathered, a living testament to loss transformed into legacy. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren filled every corner of the farmhouse and spilled out into the yard. There was food and music and dancing, and more joy than Tucker and Tessa had dreamed possible on that grief-stricken evening when they first met. Standing together while the party swirled around them, Tucker pulled Tessa close. 25 years, he marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. The best 25 years of my life, Tessa said. Even counting the hard parts, the losses, the fears, all of it has been worth it to stand here with you now, surrounded by all this life we created together. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, painting the Arkansas sky in brilliant colors, Tucker and Tessa stood on their porch one more time. In the yard, their children corralled their grandchildren. The sounds of family filled the air. The farm they had built together thrived under multiple generations' care. And the empty cradle that had once symbolized unbearable loss had been transformed into a family heirloom, ready to rock future generations. They had done what once seemed impossible. They had survived devastating grief, found love again, built a family and legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They had taken broken pieces and created something whole. They had chosen hope over despair, life over mere existence, love over fear. The lonely widow and the drifting cowboy had found each other when both needed saving most. And in saving each other, they had created something that would ripple forward through time, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the transformative power of love that arrives exactly when needed, even in the darkest moments. Their story was complete, and it was beautiful.